Hi, I'm Scott Ritzheimer with 8-Figure Focus, and this is the fifth video in our series where we're walking through how businesses should respond to the COVID crisis based specifically on where their business was in the life cycle. And so if this is your first time kind of tuning in, checking this out, let's walk through where we've been so far. Stage one of the life cycle is early struggle. Businesses, new businesses, entrepreneurs, startups. If you started your business within a year of predictable success, if you were thinking, within a year of the crisis, if you are thinking about starting a business, we talked all about what your options are. Should you wait? Should you shut down the new business? Should you push forward? How do you do that? Once an organization can get through that early struggle phase, they do it by finding a profitable, sustainable market, and that's what gets them into fun. Fun is fun. It's not necessarily easy, but it's where you're mining that market. It's where you're selling and selling and selling. If you're in the nonprofit world, you're doing and doing and doing, caring and caring. Whatever it is you do, fun is where you do the most of it. In fact, you do more of it than you ever have before. And then what happens, you grow, the organization gets bigger, and inside the organization, it gets increasingly complex. And then eventually, at some point, you either take on something externally, a crisis happens externally, something changes, and it exceeds the organization's ability to keep doing business the way that it did. And that stage is whitewater. It's a tough, difficult time. Businesses that were in whitewater when the pandemic and the economic crisis because of it started got hit pretty hard. So for those three, we talked through strategies. What is the key point, the key advantage that each of those have. And last week, we finally made it to predictable success. Predictable success is stage 4 of the life cycle. When you get through whitewater, in predictable success, you've got that magical kind of mixture of vision, innovation, and system and process. And it's where great companies are made. It's in predictable success that you're able to take big risks and execute on them effectively. In predictable success, when you put your foot on the gas, the organization moves forward. In predictable success, you're not growing faster than you can keep up with. You're actually growing as fast as you want. And what happens, though, is businesses, they get into predictable success, and they do that by taking their visionary roots and marrying them together with more system and process than they ever had in the past. And what happens is we think, okay, systems and processes got us through whitewater, so more systems and processes are going to help us, particularly in times of crisis externally. And what I've seen in working with different businesses, and what we see really across the board in economic crisis, is those businesses that were in predictable success and already moving toward treadmill, or those businesses that had been through predictable success and were in treadmill, when that crisis hits, they go deeper into that treadmill side. And treadmill is that time, and if you're a visionary, if you're a founder, if you're there, you're going to feel it when I say it, but it's that time when the business for the very first time becomes over processed. It's that time when form starts to edge out function, when FaceTime is better than getting stuff done, when you start having checklists, and then you start having checklists for checklists, and you have meetings, and that's great, and then you start having meetings to plan meetings, and then you have the meetings to review the meetings that you set in another meeting, and the whole thing just seems to lose its way. And inside the business, it can lead to quite a bit of conflict, particularly for the founder. You see, treadmill is very difficult for founders because as visionaries, treadmill, they can see the writing on the wall. They can see, hey, we didn't get here by doing systems and processes. Yes, they helped, but we got here by taking risks. We got here by saying yes to the customer. We got here by all those things that have made us successful and fun, and that we were able to marry together with system and process and predictable success. That's how we got here. And increasingly, there are people in the business, oftentimes processors, maybe synergists, who are driving the organization and pushing the organization toward more systematization, more process, for the goal of more efficiency. These aren't bad people. They're doing great work. The problem is we start to lose some of the balance, and in its place we get this tension. And for a lot of founders, it marks the beginning of the end. For a lot of founders, they're recognizing, hey, my time at this company that I started, my nth child, if you will, it may be time for me to pass it on. And they'll either take a step back and run the company passively. They'll hire a professional CEO. They'll move into one particular part of the business where they can tinker and innovate and do things like that. But largely, they step out of that decision-making role and responsibility inside of an organization. And around that, particularly again for founders, there's a lot of emotion involved. And oftentimes, as hard-charging A-types, we don't like to talk about emotion, but it's really important, especially right now, for us to recognize kind of that emotional journey of what's going on. So in the very beginning, we've already talked about this briefly, but there's this idea of maybe my future isn't being with the company that I started. And there's a grief process that has. Finding a successor is painful. Seeing your business fail or succeed, either one, after you're gone, is difficult, because you're separating something from you that's been a massive part of your life for years and years. And oftentimes we kind of work through that, we get through that, and then we move into the next thought process, which is maybe it's time to sell. And if you were thinking about selling back in January, February, maybe even March or April, you probably experienced a whole new round of grief when it seemed like that opportunity just completely slammed shut. Or maybe it didn't hit until a little bit later, your sales cycle's longer, or whatever factors may have been involved, and you didn't end up really feeling that right away, but at some point it hits. I might not be able to exit this business right now. And those plans that you had for either the next business or to semi-retire or to fully retire all of a sudden feel a lot further away. And I've talked to several folks, and there's just this sense of like, is this it? Really, I worked all this time, and could this really be it? And I want to say this, I want to say it strong. For some businesses, this is the end. There are some businesses who will not make it through this crisis. Breaks my heart. I wish there was another way, but there are some. There's some that have already failed. There are some that will fail. But for you, there's nothing in the book that says this has to be the end of your business. In fact, I think the silver lining of all of this for you, if this was you in your company, is you have a very rare opportunity to actually reignite that spark that's been missing in the business for a while. You have an opportunity to bring that innovation, that entrepreneurial zeal, that excitement back into the organization. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is there's an external crisis, and every time there's an external crisis, things get shaken up, and leadership matters in a significant way. And so you get a new opportunity to right and steer the ship. Another thing that happens is I found a lot of visionary leaders will actually get super sharp and clear in a crisis. It actually motivates them to get back in the game and take hold of the steering wheel and move forward. The crisis, it's a challenge, but it's a new challenge, and one that I've seen many visionary leaders embrace. And again, it could be that thing that you need to get the spark back in the whole business. Now, it's not going to happen automatically, right? And what happens, and I mentioned this earlier, and I just really want to dig into it, is Gravity is pulling your business out of predictable success. It's pulling it away from predictable success. It's going to pull it through treadmill. It's going to pull it down into the big rut if left to its own momentum. And that's what happens in normal times. So what's happening now in the midst of the economic crisis, in the midst of the pandemic and all the uncertainty, is not only is gravity working against you, you now have a tailwind as well. And there's an analogy I like to use for this, which is Formula One drivers. And Formula One drivers, one of the biggest challenges that they'll face is a tailwind at the end of a long straight. So what the tailwind does is it gets them moving faster down the straight, which is fantastic. And it does that by stalling the aerodynamics on the car, reduces drag, helps the vehicle go faster. The problem is when they get to the end of that straightaway, they've got to brake hard and they've got to turn hard. And both of those are inhibited by the tailwind. The tailwind's pushing them forward. They're moving faster than they were before. And when they go to turn, they don't have the downforce they're accustomed to. And so what happens for businesses and for cars is when there's that tailwind pushing you in a single direction, even if you can get the car to brake, if you can get the car to turn, you may not be able to hang on to it and it'll continue to slide. And so what we have to do, we have to recognize the environment, respond to it, and really look at, okay, what strategy is necessary to help us get from where we are to where we're going in light of all of this. And that's really what I want to introduce in the course of this video. And a great example of this, if you have time, some of you do, some of you have less time than ever, but if you have a moment, I'd strongly encourage you to look into Churchill, Winston Churchill, look at his leadership principles, look even on Wikipedia about how he turned really an entire country, an entire war around. And it gives us a great framework for understanding what we need to do as leaders to turn around a, unfortunately, probably bureaucratic organization, one that has lost some of its enthusiasm and capacity for risk. And, what I like to tell people is, hey, if Churchill could do it with an entire empire, then you can do it with your business. Let's look at this a little bit. There are two kind of key initiatives that I want to focus in on for you. And the first one is to lead the entire company. Oftentimes when businesses get big, CEOs will fall into the trap of leading their leaders and not leading the whole company. That's okay in times of growth. It's okay in times of relative certainty. It's not going to work at all in times of uncertainty. And so we're going to dive into a few different ways you can do that. Second thing here is we need to reinstitutionalize risk-taking. And, sorry about that, we need to reinstitutionalize risk-taking. And I'll show you again a couple of key strategies on how to do exactly that. So let's talk about leading the entire company. Quick things, you guys are great leaders. You know what I'm talking about. This is going to be a reminder more than it is going to be an education, but it's important. The very first thing you need to do is shorten the feedback loops. Most businesses that are in Treadmill, they've got layers in the company, and those layers are sanitizing the information that's coming through. Churchill did this with the Office of Wartime Statistics, I think it was called. But basically he said, I want this group of people that are outside the normal chain of command, and I want them to tell me the truth. I want them to tell me exactly what's going on. I don't want it sanitized by a bunch of people who are trying to keep their positions, keep their jobs, whatever it may be. We need to know the truth, and we need to know it fast. We need to hear from customers in the business world. We need to hear from our frontline workers. We need to hear from everyone, and our job as leaders is to really synthesize that and give everyone a path forward. Related to that, we've got to get out to the front line. And there's really no way around this. We saw it with a great example of this was the Home Depot executives when they got their turnaround. Every executive was required to spend time out of the corporate suite and in a store. And it's the only way to get the turnaround that we're talking about for a treadmill organization, to get out to the front line, get your hands dirty, show the company what it means to do what you guys do, show them what's important, show them what types of behaviors you're expecting, show them the values that you exude as a leader, and it goes a long way. Finally, and this is a big one, you need to craft a compelling narrative. It's not enough to just be there. You have to be able to communicate in the process. And there's a few parts of this. One is you need to craft a rallying cry. You need to give your people something to believe in. You need to have that one unifying call that everyone can get behind. It needs to be action oriented. It needs to be simple to understand, jargon free, maybe 3 to 5 words, if that. But we just need a short rallying cry that everyone can come around. And you need to repeat it again and again and again and again. If you're not annoyed at repeating your rallying cry, you've not said it enough. Second part of this is you need to craft the rest of the narrative. So a compelling narrative, something that where you can visually and vividly depict both the purpose behind why change needs to happen, but also the picture of what it's going to look like when change does happen. Winston Churchill did a phenomenal job at this, and you see it. Some of your favorite guy flicks have this one scene. You've got Braveheart, and when how many days from now, dying in your bed would trade any of those days for the opportunity that we have right now. It's casting a clear vision of success, a clear and vivid picture of the future. And the last element of this narrative is that every good and compelling story has a villain. And sometimes in the business world, this is a little weird, because it's either something so abstract that it doesn't really make sense, or it's another company and that gets weird, or sometimes it's just hard to identify who's the villain in this story. Well, in times of crisis, the villain becomes crystal clear, right? The villain is the COVID-19 pandemic, the virus itself, the crisis that it caused. It's this external thing that's causing problems inside the organization, and it's very, very effective to rally people around overcoming this nameable villain. So just real quick, shorten your feedback loops, get out to the front line, and craft a compelling narrative. All right, initiative number 2, we're talking about reinstitutionalizing risk-taking. And this really is, oftentimes I'll teach folks that the end of a business, it actually happens with decisions made in Treadmill, right? There are 2 more stages. There's the big rut and there's death rattle. And death rattle, everyone sees the business die, but the reality of it is it really died all the way up in Treadmill. And it's where we lose the ability to take risks, and then we lose the ability to even recognize that something is wrong with that. What does a crisis do? It makes reinstitutionalizing risk-taking a lot easier. The stakes are raised. Oftentimes you have to do it. It becomes a necessity. And even if it's not an absolute necessity, it's much easier to communicate the necessity in changing. And that's for a few reasons. One is extreme action is easier to justify, right? When you've taken the time to set the groundwork that you did back in Initiative 1 of getting out on the front line, shortening your feedback loops, crafting that compelling narrative, then what would typically appear to be maybe a rash or extreme or just immature decision, it's much easier for everyone to get behind it from the very beginning and say, hey, we're on to something. This is actually something we have to do. We have to change. Another part of this is there's no safe options that you have to overcome, right? In normal times, a business in Treadmill, the difficulty in turning it around is that there are great arguments for why it doesn't need to turn around. There are statistics that say we're more profitable than ever. There's external articles that are written about how wonderful we are. That we're doing new things-ish, and there's enough good stuff going on to just kind of lull us to sleep. When we're in the midst of crisis like we have right now, even tasks as domestic as grocery shopping seem dangerous to a certain extent. Sending our kids to school is too dangerous in some places. And so as leaders, we kind of get the opportunity to move under the cover of risk. There's a sense of there's a lot that we can move around and do without drawing too much unnecessary attention, because everything is kind of dialed up to 10. The third part here, and this is the part that really gets me excited, is that the return is higher if you get it right. Most businesses are not going to do this. They're going to ride the momentum. They're going to follow gravity. They're going to follow the tailwind, and they're going to move right from treadmill into the big rut and feel like they won. But that doesn't have to be your story. And because so many people are moving in that direction, it actually creates even more opportunity for those who are able to resist the flow. And so as a visionary, this is a great tool in your tool belt, because where it may be 50-50 before, even that 41-59 into your favor could be the thing that you need to move your team forward. A few reasons why I think that, particularly for treadmill businesses, that the opportunity is so great right now and that the returns are going to be so high. First one is this: everyone bigger than you is in freeze mode. I've talked to many small businesses and they're all worried about big businesses. And then I go and talk to big businesses and they're all sitting there not doing anything because they're worried about their risk. The reality of it is big businesses that are in the big rut, they think they can wait this out. And maybe they can, but it's not going to create value for the future. And so what that means for you is that everyone bigger than you isn't moving. That means that you, number two, are one of the biggest ones that are moving, because everyone smaller than you doesn't have the resources accumulated that you do. Small companies who may have been about to pose a significant threat to you, your entire industry, they may be struggling to make ends meet. You have an opportunity now to take advantage of that additional time, to turn things around. Maybe it's through acquisitions, maybe it's through homegrown stuff, maybe it's just through innovating within the business. Whatever mechanism that is, everyone bigger than you is frozen. Everyone smaller than you doesn't have the resources that you do, which means there's this Goldilocks zone in a way that you're in that allows you to move forward. Third part is very much so related to that, is there's a lot of discounts out there. There's discounts on everything from marketing to folks liquidating office supplies, to those smaller, vibrant organizations wondering if they're actually going to make it through the crisis. And you have an opportunity now, if you're willing to take those risks, to leverage that balance sheet that you have and take advantage of these resources that really are at an incredible discount. And finally, number 4, we're just about to wrap up here, is buyer behaviors have been upended across the board. Okay, what does that mean? Everything about the way that we buy has been changed. And what that means for us is there's opportunity out there like there wasn't before. It means that from a marketing standpoint, people are considering different options that they didn't consider beforehand. I would go so far as to say a vast majority of individuals, and there's even been some statistics around this, are looking at doing business with businesses they've never done business with before. And that's just how it works. When there's chaos going on, it shakes things up. Sometimes we need more. Sometimes we can't get what we need from our normal location and we look somewhere else. Sometimes we just have extra time and so we look for something else. And what it means for you is that if you're willing to take risk, if you're willing to push for change, push back into that disruptive space that you've done successfully, maybe it was a year ago, maybe it was years ago, but you have done it. It's time to do it again. And so just wrapping up, if your business was in Treadmill at the beginning of the year, you have to be careful. You cannot ride the wave. You cannot wait it out and hope that things will get better. It's not going to work. You may survive, and you probably will, but you won't be the business that you were before all of this started. And the same is true. If you turn it around, you won't be the business that you started before, but you'll be a much more vibrant, electric, excited, innovative, and capable business. One that's not only riding out the value that you've created in the past, but actually helping you to create the value that you'll live on in the future. So go, check it out. There's resources that are linked to this article, to this video, and I'd encourage you to look at them. I'd encourage you to have some conversations with your team and really look and say, okay, now is our chance. Now is the opportunity. How are we going to reignite the spark inside our business? All right, I wish you the best of luck. Take care.